Hi, all. Here we are today to think about Chapter 5 and to consider Chapter 6. Chapters 5 and 6 is the division between the first part of our book, where we talk about the opportunities that we have and the way that those affect our success. Gladwell has part 2 of the book be about legacy and the way that the things that go on in the past have necessarily impacted you as well. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to consider a couple of pieces here. So, ladies and gentlemen, in Chapter 5, you meet Joe Flom. There he is, wizened, wrinkled by the life experiences that he has had. I like to take some time with Joe Flom, especially after we finish our reading of Night. Night, coincidentally, the book that the seniors chose this year as their best book that they read in all of high school. Anywho, Joe Flom had experienced anti-Semitism. He was unable to get a top-tier legal job despite the pedigree that should have made that possible. However, that gave him opportunity to experience a different kind of law practice that became more and more relevant over time. Ultimately, Joe Flom did become an outlier. We want to go ahead and just take a peek here. I want you to appreciate that this is their current website, or it was a couple of years ago. That looks like it's a little bit older, but just, know that they are a firm. They are out there in the world today, right? And they're at 4 Times Square. Okay, so as you continue on, Gladwell uses 2 additional case studies, Maurice and Mort Janklow, right? 2 different people, different family, or same family, different times, and their success was predicated upon the opportunities that the time that they lived in gave them. Lewis and Regina Borgenicht show us something a little bit different, though. They show us what meaningful work necessarily means and why that's important for opportunity. So, when we consider the garment industry, generational evolution, or the importance of being told no, all 3 of these stories have one thing in common. The opportunities that the individuals had in the time periods that they lived were predicated upon their antecedents, the people that came before them in their lives, their previous generations. So, this furthers Gladwell's thesis that success, especially outlier level success, never happens in a vacuum. It happens as a result of a variety of different factors. He shares this chart, which I think is actually vitally interesting and important, and he does that when he's talking about the Borgenicht family. But the idea that someone might be a tailor or a garment maker, and then they might start their own business, manifesting enough leisure time for their child to become educated, to become a lawyer, and then ultimately affording upward social mobility. Gladwell argues that this does take place over generations and that ultimately the liar's children after that will tend to go ahead and be able to participate in all sorts of more like fun intellectual activities. In a snip you see here from the New York Times, we see that John Adams wrote a letter to his wife in 1780 that ultimately said, basically, because I've had to work hard and achieve some very practical financial success, my kids hopefully will be able to go ahead and study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain. I mean, tapestry. But hey, what I think he's ultimately saying is that his children will be able to follow his dreams because he has the luxury of that success. We see later in an article from The Atlantic with a very provocative headline, if I do say so myself, Rich Kids Study English. A chart that The Atlantic asserts, I'll show you on the next slide. Basically, this is kind of an interesting chart that shows how does the choice of college major correlate with parents' household income. Now, certainly we're talking about people that go to college, right? So ultimately we're looking at a particular group within society. But in this particular case, right, if your parents have a lower household income, you tend to be in more like directly career-oriented jobs, right? Law enforcement, firefighting, education, psychology, computer science, things that are going to guarantee you a job upon graduation. Whereas English absolutely might. I have been gainfully employed in my major for 18 years now, but I'm not sure that's the case with every English major. My dad, for example, majored in English and finance. He became a lawyer. My mom has a doctorate in education, and I studied English, and my brother majored in photography. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say here, right, is we have a lovely metaphor. I would have made you discuss this in your table groups. But the tallest oak in the forest is not the tallest just because it had the hardiest seed. It's not just the raw material, but ultimately it's because nobody cut it down, and no rabbit ate it, and no little doggy ate it. Um, I'm sorry, I have a little doggy that's running around eating everything right now. All I'm trying to say is all of these external factors do contribute to success, including your past. Now, as we mentioned, part one was about opportunity in this text, right? We looked at relative age, exponentially compounding experiences, 10,000 hours, IQ, EQ, parenting style, generational wealth, and meaningful work. But we're now going to be talking about cultural legacy, and we're going to consider the way the cultural legacy that you inherit from the place that you live, or the places that you live, ultimately does contribute to your success. So we're adding, ladies and gentlemen, to our lovely list of ingredients to success, the idea of cultural legacy, and we'll divide that up into some pieces as we go. How does the culture we live in affect our prospects for success? So you would be considering, as you read chapter 6, the social implications of a culture of honor and what Gladwell wants you to learn. So to be clear, within chapter 6, we're going to go ahead and you're going to be learning about a big feud, okay, the Howard Turner feud in Harlan. Um, Gladwell wants to talk about this feud because this feud ultimately manifested a culture of honor that's lasted for generations. Um, the University of Michigan has done a study that indicates that there is still a profound effect generations later, right, about the way that people's cultures of honor affect the choices they make on a daily basis. In general, a culture of honor sometimes means that an individual will react with anger when they perceive an insult rather than with laughter. And that can have remarkable implications on opportunity, EQ, etc. The picture that you see right here is actually from the book Huck Finn. I'm not sure whether or not you guys will read that, but it's been read in the past in 11th grade. And Huck Finn ultimately talks about a Grangerford and Shepperson's feud. I, Mrs. Matheny, though, recently found out that on my father's side, back in the day, somebody had a generations long feud. My people are from from Missouri to Mississippi, apparently. A generations long feud with Davy Crockett's family. The Crockett's. I don't know. I got to do some research. So, what I would be asking you guys to consider in your table groups, and this would have been probably one of the more fun discussion days we had today in class. Oh well, think on your own. What cultural legacy do we as Washingtonians inherit? Now, I know that not all of you identify as a Washingtonian, but we are all experiencing high school here in Washington together, and as such, that will have a cultural sort of effect on you. So, considering that, what other cultural legacies inform and affect your behavior? Just a few ideas. For example, Doran, as you know, is from Virginia. And as you probably appreciate, in Virginia, this is the trash at Panera. Okay, so we've got trays, we've got trash, we've got plates, mugs, and silverware. But then, if you go to Panera here in Washington, what you will find is an additional section for recycling. This is built into the hardware of the store, same store, different regional area, and that's because at the time that that picture was taken, more Virginians um, didn't seem to require a recycling thing, but Washingtonians, oh, as you well know, we do. My class is often surprised to find out that there are, places in Montana where they still don't collect recycling, like, at all. If you want to recycle, you have to drive it long distances. There are many good things about Montana, let me say, but this is a map of Washington that is rife with terrible stereotypes, but it's also kind of funny. It is just horrible, but also funny. What we want to appreciate in this particular case, right, is that Washington is a very diverse state. And as a result of that, we're going to say that the Washingtonian experience, and this really is the point of me showing you this silly slide, the Washingtonian experience is not one thing. We can never say that all Washingtonians are having the same experience. But we're going to appreciate, of course, that we are a large state. Politically, this is how we voted in the 2016 presidential election. And when you look at this particular one, you're going to appreciate that there is, a polar sort of political divide within Washington, and that's also going to go ahead and affect what it is you're considering. So, what I'm going to ask you guys to do for Friday, and I'm sorry we can't do a Zoom call like we thought. We've got the senior tunnel kind of the whole day, but the four square cultural analysis. So, all I'm asking you guys to do in a journal entry, okay, or I might put it as a Google slide, just kind of bear with me. I haven't decided yet. But in whatever I've decided to post, I want you to consider these four questions. Do we have a dominant culture of honor? What linguistic cultural legacy do we as Washingtonians inherit? Kind of what makes us Washingtonians. And again, if you're not a Washingtonian, speaking as an outsider is absolutely good. What other non-Washingtonian cultural legacies inform your behavior? One thing I always have my students do also is consider this quiz. It came from 2013 in the New York Times, but it asks you to consider your regional dialect within the United States. And again, the point of this activity is just remember, like, nothing is just one thing. We learned that from The Lighthouse from Virginia Woolf. With this, though, we're going to appreciate that this dialect map ultimately asks you to consider the way that you talk. And if you look at my dialect map, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, which is kind of right in the middle. This is what I get when I take this. So I've linked this regional dialect survey to see what your linguistic cultural legacy is. Sometimes it might reflect through like generations. If your parents are like from the East Coast, you might get some East Coast action there. Who knows? So, ladies and gentlemen, your job is to consider our Washingtonian cultural legacy. And I thank you guys very much. I just want to give you a heads up. Chapter 7 is long, so you might want to, if reading is a thing, you might want to start doing that. Okay, thank you guys. Have a great day.